It's right at 32 degrees and we have fog, which is a very dangerous situation. So you never know when this fog is going to coat the surfaces with a very thin layer of invisible ice. And as you can see in my neighborhood here, I don't think we've seen a plow on these roads. We may have, but I don't know. We're doing a better job in Kansas City of concentrating on the main roads. That's a good thing, but I think they kind of decided that a lot of the neighborhood streets will not see a plow. And we're coming up to a very dangerous hill here. I slow down. Fortunately, when I came to the car, I noticed that there was moisture on the windshield, but it wasn't frozen. So hopefully I won't have to really be dealing with much, but I'm going to be easy. And we just creep down this hill and maybe find the middle ground. Although sometimes you get into the area where it's been run over by a lot of tires, and you'll find that's slicker than the sides that still have a blanket of snow on them. Yeah, so far, I haven't heard the telltale. Oh, there it went, just a little bit. The anti-lock brakes kicking in. And you know, with anti-lock brakes, they say do the opposite of what you're using, and that is you cram your foot on the anti-lock brakes and let them do the braking. You don't pump them. In the old days, I guess the whole generation's come up not knowing anything but anti-lock brakes. But in the old days, brakes to not lock your wheels up. And now we have computer-assisted brakes that sense when wheels are losing traction and pump it for you. And you can see, let me turn on my brights. You can see what kind of pea soup I'm driving in. The visibility is really low. They say don't use your brights when you're driving in the fog because it just scatters the light. I'm more or less just doing this because it shows up better on the video. Actually, looking at my video versus looking with my eyes, it seems like I could see better through the video screen. No, I'm keeping my eyes on the road. Trust me. Oh, that house has turned off most of its Christmas lights. Technically, you're not supposed to turn your Christmas lights off until the Epiphany, or, take your decorations down. It's still, according to the Catholic Church, it is still in the midst of the Christmas season. And have we had the Feast of Three Kings yet? That is Epiphany. Duh. So that normally doesn't come until, January 12th, 13th? Which is also when the Orthodox Church generally celebrates their Christmas season. And the Three Kings night is also the beginning of the countdown to Lent. And so all the Mardi Gras crews start having their little festivities, their parties. Mardi Gras cruise, I think it's all centered around a bar called The Ship now. It used to be centered around a little place called YJ's. It was one of my favorite coffee houses in the city, and unfortunately it shut down. I've documented the history of YJ's really well in my videos. So you can look back and see I have a whole playlist dedicated to YJs. I may have missed a video or two, but I think I've done a pretty comprehensive job of showing what the place was like and some of the personalities involved, and wish the owner David Ford well in his endeavors. Unfortunately, it was a multiple cases of the owners of the building that YJ's existed in. They were getting up there in years, and they were starting to have health issues, and they couldn't manage a property like that anymore. So they decided to sell, which meant that YJ's chose to move rather than deal with another landlord and high rent and everything else like that. Unfortunately, the location where they moved to, I thought was great. I love the place, but unfortunately the bills were too high, and the customers did not follow. I'm driving real slow. I don't know how the roads are as far as the ice. And when you discover that there is ice is usually when it's too late. That shows you how foggy it is. Again, I believe this fog is being caused by the moisture that's being put up in the air during the day when the temperatures are above freezing, and it's causing the snow to melt, putting a lot of humidity in the air. And then when the temperatures drop at night, then it condenses close to the ground, and then when you get to this temperature right now, right at freezing is when the stuff starts freezing on contact with the road surfaces and trees and power lines and everything, and it's really, really hazardous, especially driving at night. Sorry. I think you can see by the city lights how foggy it is. Here's the bad place right here. Crossing over overpasses. Now, some people might say that I overreact. I'm kind of a pussy when it comes to this stuff, but I've ended up in a ditch before. It's not fun. And so I'd rather overreact than underreact. I'd rather get there than find out the hard way and destroy my property and possibly alter my life in a very bad way. Or, if you really lose control, alter somebody else's life. When crossing over the bridges, make sure you're extra careful, because the bridges tend to freeze up first since they're up in the air. And I think one of the things that frustrates me and frustrates all drivers in this situation is when you got somebody, I'm not accusing this truck of doing that. I'm just saying when you got somebody who gets right up on your butt and tailgates you. I've also had it where people, like, well, one year I was driving into downtown and come to an overpass, and a pickup truck came roaring past me on a snowy day, and he hit the end of the overpass and lost control within feet of my front bumper. I mean, just spun out. I'm like, this guy's going to take me out too. Unfortunately, he didn't. He hit the both sides of the bridge really hard and was uninjured. But I hate to sound callous, but I didn't really feel sorry for him. I was just glad that he didn't take me out too. And two-wheel drive pickup trucks, and oftentimes four-wheel drive pickup trucks, are the worst vehicles for this kind of. They're real light in the rear end. And even if it's four-wheel drive, a four-wheel drive vehicle is not great for trying, all-wheel drive is better, but four-wheel drive is not great because you really need to have bad traction situations for the four-wheel drive to actually work. Otherwise, you're just being rough on your expensive four-wheel drive system. But I've noticed one year we had what was it, 2002? Had a really bad ice storm. Lasted for over a week. Power was out in many places for weeks. And the first night of it, I was called out to go there. They said, there's been a wreck on I-35. Can you go check it out, Steve? So I went and checked it out. And there wasn't one wreck. It was a bunch of wrecks. And all of them were SUVs. And they were all pretty much the same model of SUV. They were Chevy Blazers. That was before they started building the Trailblazer. It was about a year before the Trailblazer came out. And they were all Chevy Blazers. And they all were on their side or on their roof, all up and down I-35. It must have been 5 or 6 like that. And I was scared to even get out of the car because it was so slick on the highway. And my theory is that the Blazer is a four-wheel drive SUV, and people should have had, and they forgot to hit the button to put it in four-wheel drive, and they thought, oh, I'm safe, I'm in an SUV. And I'm like, no, you're probably in one of the worst vehicles to drive on the road in two-wheel drive. And even in four-wheel drive, make sure you drive really, really slow. And that was the night that I found an area like 435 westbound, right after the I-35, where the what they call them in Texas, the Mixmaster, the interchanges between, hit a slick spot. And I was actually driving a Chevy Blazer. That was the car that we had at the time. And I was driving super duper slow in four-wheel drive. And I hit the slick spot, and I could feel the car just slip around on it. And I was like, ooh, this is really slick. And I noticed there were a whole bunch of cars sitting there. Some were still in the middle of the road. They had spun out, and some had collided with each other. So I was like, I need to come back and see if I can find a good, safe vantage point. Came back on the other side of the road, pulled off, and found a vantage point behind some of the cars that had actually ended up in the ditch, and sat there with my camera, and I started rolling. And no sooner I started rolling, a car spun out in the middle of the road, and I caught it, and just completely spun out. And the next thing I know, another car came and plowed right into him, going way too fast, plowed into him, and knocked the car into the ditch. Actually, it started coming towards me. I thought, oh no, I'm in an unsafe spot. And the next morning, they were playing that video over and over and over again. The anchor even said, I'm scared for just watching that video. That is awesome. And I was like, yeah, it's awesome, but yeah. I'm glad I caught it and glad I was actually safe. Now we're crossing the Kit Bone Bridge. I like to make jokes about the name. And you can barely see it. It does look spectacular, though. It's very beautiful. Named after Christopher Kit Bond, a senator from the state of Missouri and former governor of the state of Missouri. Usually right about here you can see downtown, some of the buildings, but nope. Too foggy. I'm doing about 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. And so far so good. I haven't felt myself slip too much. My temperature gauge in the car still says 32 degrees. It may be is okay, but still can be dicey because you hit overpasses and it's 34 degrees. Well, the overpass may be below freezing, and you know. You can see how wet the roads look. As long as that's water and not ice. It just crossed over into January 4th. Did it? Did any of the 3rd or 4th? I'm losing track. 4th or 5th. Duh. It just crossed over to the next day. Let's just say that. Let's see. Friday was the 1st. Saturday the 2nd. Yesterday. You can imagine what this would be like driving on a rural road with no streetlights. As it is, the streetlights are just kind of scattered. They're diffused. Another hazard of these kind of conditions, even if the roads aren't slick, is if somebody has an accident and then everybody insists on driving 800 miles an hour, they come upon the accident, there's nowhere to go. And you know, we've had situations all over the country where there's a big fatal pileup of sometimes upwards to 100 cars or more. And in Kansas City we had that happen. When was that? Was that late 90s, early 2000s? I can't remember. It may have been 2002. So we had that happen up north, up by the airport. A big pile up, and it involved semis, and one of the semis caught on fire, and a lot of the there were, I think, 14 people died in it, and a lot of the victims were burned to death in their cars, which is horrible. And what really ticked me off about that was the exact same day that a football player from the Kansas City Chiefs was driving with his friend, and they lost control of their car, their SUV, in the ice, and they weren't wearing seatbelts, and the football player was thrown clear, broke his back, and then he went to the hospital, and he died days later from complications. But I mean, you know, that's tragic, and I don't mean to make light of it, but to me, the 14 people who died in the big pileup was a bigger story. But it was overshadowed by a famous person who was injured in a wreck. And it was like, oh, let's forget about the big pileup. On a normal day, it would be wall-to-wall coverage. But instead, we went wall-to-wall coverage with the football player. And to me it's like the primary story is the 14 people, and then the secondary story is the famous person who had the wreck. You cover it, but I think it was more important to cover plus the fact that it happened during a big snowstorm, blizzard conditions, and the warning is, hey, drive carefully. Yeah, I remember that. I remember, we got to dispatch a crew up by the airport. It's been a horrible wreck, and they couldn't hardly get to it. It was a real struggle for them to. And of course, the only option they had was using an ENG van. So they got up there, and they couldn't find a good place to get a vantage. I think was at the time we still had the helicopter. I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was, and I think they tried to get the helicopter up, but the helicopters can't fly in certain weather conditions, and I think we couldn't get it up because it was snowing so bad. And then a phone call came in to the station. There's been a bad wreck up on 435. This is a different wreck, and it involves a celebrity. And everybody's like, oh, I wonder who that is. Oh no, and they started going crazy over that, and pondering, and then it was like, the celebrity is a football player, and is it a Chiefs player? And then they really started going crazy, and then it's like changing all our coverage, and we're going to cover that, go wall to wall, and speculation, and then another tip came in. The football player is Derek Thomas. I'm like, oh. And at the time, he was a big deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, probably one of the big players. And like I say, I'm not disrespecting or denigrating him or his life in any way. I'm just saying that leading with that and then not really, like making the big pile up with 14 people dead secondary, I think was kind of disrespectful. Kind of the priorities out of whack, but that's just me. I mean, yeah, you send a crew up there and you cover it and everything else like that. Like, you don't make it like wall to wall. Unfortunately, and Kansas City is a big sports town, and unfortunately there's a saying that goes that if a flea were to bite a minor sports celebrity on the butt in this town, we would move heaven and earth to get an exclusive interview with the flea. As you can tell, sports is not a big thing with me. I'm not obsessed with sports. I understand there are a lot of people who are, and it's all driven by ratings. And though it kind of is a source of irritation for me, I understand why, why there is a desire to do it. This is my Monday, or as I call it, Monday. Actually, it is Monday. Duh. And I am not at my best on Mondays because it is really hard with this shift, A, to get to bed early enough, and B, to get to sleep. Now, I went to bed early enough and just woke up an hour later and wasn't able to get back to sleep. maybe we could blame it on having too much caffeine consumption during the day, or just, I don't know. It's just really it's really hard to switch up and unwind from the weekend. And then I wake up and I have a lot of things on my mind, and the brain starts spinning, and counting sheep doesn't help. Plus, if there is any kind of weather coming in, like another winter storm, low pressure system, it affects my moods. And so don't come near me on a Monday. I have tea, and tea has caffeine. I need to make stronger tea. I need to go get the loose leaf tea again, because the tea bags aren't cutting it. When I make coffee at home and I bring it to work, it doesn't taste so good. Like, tea, it gets stronger and tastes better to me. And I have a Yeti cup, and it's really keeps it warm a long time. But coffee, no matter what you do, an hour after you make it, it's like, bleh. Well, anyway, it's been fun. Got to end it here. So, hee hee.